The first thing you notice is the silence. It's not a peaceful quiet. It's a thick, heavy thing. It fills the small house on Maple Drive, pressing down on the ceilings, absorbing the sound of the refrigerator's hum, swallowing the distant rush of a car on wet pavement outside. In that silence, every other sense screams. The smell of yesterday's coffee, gone cold and bitter in the pot. The feel of the worn, nubby fabric on the arm of the couch where Sam's hand kept absently, rubbing back and forth, until a faint gray spot appeared. The sight of the rain, a slow, lazy drizzle, tracing endless, intersecting paths down the living room window, and the sight of the cat, Ghost, a stark white smudge against the deep blue of the armchair. She was staring again. Not at Sam. Not at the window. Not at anything in the room. Her head was tilted at a slight, peculiar angle, one snow-white ear twitching almost imperceptibly. Her whole body so still she seemed carved from marble. Her wide, ocean-blue eyes were fixed on a point somewhere in the middle of the room, a place where there was nothing but dust motes dancing in the weak afternoon light. Sam watched her from the couch, a hollowed-out feeling in their chest. It had been 6 months since the move, since leaving the noise and the life of the city behind for this quiet little town, for this quiet little house that was supposed to be a fresh start. But the silence they'd craved had turned out to be a vacuum, and it had sucked all the sound out of their life, too. The laughter, the music, the easy chatter with friends that used to fill the evenings. It was all gone. All that was left was this crushing, endless quiet, and Ghost. They'd adopted her from the shelter precisely because of her silence. Special needs, the volunteer had said, her voice soft with a practiced kind of pity. She's completely deaf. Was born that way. She was surrendered because, well, people get nervous. They think a pet that can't hear them can't love them. They don't understand. Sam had understood immediately. They'd looked into the cat's calm, unblinking blue eyes and seen a creature living in a world of its own, a world without sound, and it felt like looking into a mirror. They'd brought her home that day. Ghost was a creature of profound, almost eerie stillness. She didn't startle at the slam of a door. She didn't come running at the crinkle of a treat bag. She existed on a different frequency, tuned into a station no one else could hear. She learned the rhythms of the house through vibration, through sight. She knew when Sam was heading to the kitchen to feed her by the shift in weight on the floorboards. She knew the specific way the lamplight hit the wall at 5 p.m., signaling the end of the workday and the beginning of couch-sitting time. She was a master of observation, reading a world she could not hear with an intensity that was sometimes unsettling. Like right now. Sam followed her line of sight, squinting into the empty space. There was nothing there. Just the old fireplace, cold and dark. A bookshelf crammed with novels they hadn't had the energy to read. A photograph of their parents, smiling, frozen in time. "What is it, girl?" Sam whispered, the sound of their own voice strange in the muffled room. Ghost didn't flinch, didn't blink. Her focus was absolute. It was a behavior that had become more frequent lately. She would freeze, her body tensing, her nose working the air as if she could smell a change in the atmosphere. She'd stare at a blank wall, or the ceiling corner, or the space behind the television, her whole being thrumming with a tension Sam could feel from across the room. At first, Sam had joked about it. Ghosts for a cat named Ghost. Funny, but the joke had worn thin. Now it just felt odd, a little unnerving. A constant reminder that this animal they lived with was perceiving a reality they could not access. Sam sighed, the sound loud in the quiet. They pushed themselves up from the couch, the bones aching from too much stillness, and padded to the kitchen. The floor was cold under their socks. They filled the kettle, the clang of it against the stainless steel sink making them wince. They set it on the stove, the click-click-click of the igniter absurdly violent. They watched the blue flame leap to life, a tiny, roaring sun. When they turned around, Ghost was in the doorway. She hadn't made a sound, of course. She just appeared, a silent sentinel. Her blue eyes were no longer fixed on the empty living room. They were fixed on Sam. Her head was still cocked, but differently now. It was less about listening for something unseen and more about assessment. Concern, almost. She took a few delicate steps into the kitchen, her white paws silent on the linoleum. She stopped a few feet away, sat, and wrapped her tail neatly around her feet. She just watched. Sam was used to her aloofness. She was not. A cuddler. She expressed affection by being in the same room, by following them from space to space, a quiet, pale shadow. But this felt different. This felt focused, intentional. The kettle began its low building whistle. A thin stream of steam shot from its spout. Sam turned to grab a mug from the cupboard, the familiar routine, a small comfort. And that's when it happened. A shriek, piercing, unmistakable, the fire alarm. Sam jumped, their heart instantly hammering against their ribs. They spun around, their eyes scanning the stove. The kettle was whistling, but that wasn't it. That was a steady, predictable sound. This was a sharp, electronic, panicked scream. It was coming from the hallway, the smoke detector right outside the bedroom. Oh God, Sam breathed. Their mind racing. Had something sparked? Had they left something on? They hadn't cooked anything. The stove was off except for the one burner. They took a step toward the hallway, their body tensed for action. But then they stopped. They froze, their blood running cold. The alarm was shrieking, a relentless, ear-splitting noise that filled the small house, bouncing off the walls. And Ghost was still sitting on the kitchen floor. She hadn't moved. She hadn't jumped. She hadn't so much as twitched. Her ocean blue eyes were still locked on Sam. Calm. Unbothered. The most terrifyingly placid look on her face. The deafening, panic-inducing scream that was making Sam's hands shake was, to her, nothing. It was absolute, perfect silence. The disconnect was dizzying. The world was screaming, and their cat was sitting in a pool of profound quiet. Sam stood there, paralyzed for a second, caught between the urgent blaring alarm and the impossible serene stillness of the white cat on the floor. And then, as suddenly as it started, the alarm stopped. The silence it left behind was even heavier than before, ringing with its own kind of noise. Sam's ears were buzzing. Their heart was still pounding. They took a shaky breath, their eyes still on Ghost. The cat, seemingly satisfied that the moment had passed, slowly, deliberately, blinked her blue eyes at Sam. A slow blink. A cat's kiss. Then she stood, stretched her back in a perfect, graceful arch, and turned. She walked out of the kitchen, her white tail held high, leaving Sam alone with the ghost of the sound and a dawning, unsettling realization. The alarm had stopped on its own. There was no smoke, no fire, a glitch, a faulty wire, a dying battery sending out a final false warning. But that wasn't the part that stuck with Sam, that lodged itself deep in their mind like a splinter. It was the timing, because just a moment. Before the alarm had screamed into life, slicing through the heavy silence of the house, Ghost had done something she had never, ever done before. In the split second before the electronic shriek began, in that last fragment of true quiet, Sam had seen it. Ghost's head had snapped toward the hallway. Not a slow, curious turn. A sharp, sudden, decisive movement. Her ears, both of them, had flattened against her skull. Her whiskers had shot forward. Her entire body had coiled into a tight spring, a pose of pure, unadulterated alarm. She had looked for all the world like a cat who had just heard a terrifying sound. A sound that hadn't happened yet. It was impossible. A trick of the light. A coincidence. Sam's own anxiety, painting patterns where there were none. They repeated these things to themselves as they mechanically made their tea, their hands still unsteady. They sat back down on the couch, the mug warming their palms. Ghost had resumed her post on the blue armchair, once again a statue, staring at nothing. But Sam couldn't let it go. The image was burned onto the back of their eyelids. The deaf cat, reacting to a sound, a heartbeat before it existed. Flinching, At a silence that was about to be broken, it made no sense. It was a puzzle piece from a different box, forced into the picture of their quiet, predictable life. It shouldn't fit. But it had happened. Sam had seen it. They sat in the deepening gloom of the afternoon, the rain still painting the window, and they watched the cat who lived in a world of silence. A cat who had, for one impossible moment, seemed to hear the future. And a quiet, fragile knowledge began to unspool within them, a single thread of thought in the vast quiet of the house. Something had begun. You're here listening, and that means more than you know. If you feel safe in these stories, your one subscribe helps me keep this quiet little corner alive. Thank you for being part of this peaceful world. The days after the alarm incident folded into one another, soft and gray, like well-worn sheets. The peculiar event settled into the fabric of Sam's life, not as a shocking revelation, but as a quiet, persistent hum in the background, a radio playing a station just out of clear range. Life returned to its quiet rhythm, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer just empty. It was now expectant. Sam found himself watching Ghost more, studying her. The cat's routine was a study in quiet precision, every morning. As the first weak, wintry light bled through the blinds, she would appear at the side of Sam's bed. Not on it, never on it. She would sit, a white statue on the dark hardwood floor, and wait. She wouldn't meow. She couldn't. She would simply exist there, a silent alarm clock, until the vibration of Sam stirring under the covers prompted her to stand, stretch, and lead the way to the kitchen. Her world was a map of vibrations and sights. She knew the specific thump of Sam's feet hitting the floor meant food was imminent. She knew the particular way the light from the television flickered against the wall at night signaled an hour of stillness on the couch. She was attuned to the subtlest shifts in the atmosphere of the house, a living barometer for a world without sound. And Sam, in their own quiet way, began to learn her language. They learned that a slow, deliberate blink from across the room was her version of a contented sigh. They learned that the very tip of her tail twitching, just the very end, like a feather caught in a faint breeze, meant she was deeply focused on something. A dust mote, a fly, the mysterious nothingness she sometimes stared into. They learned that if she sat with her back to them, it wasn't dismissal. It was the highest form of feline trust, a belief that Sam would guard her while she faced the world. The bond was a fragile thing, built not in grand gestures but in 1,000 tiny, silent moments. It was in the way Sam would deliberately walk, a little heavier when they entered a room so as not to startle her. It was in the way they started switching the living room lamp on and off 3 times before leaving the house, a visual signal that said, "I'm going, but I'll be back." It was in the way they'd catch themselves talking to her anyway, their voice a low murmur in the quiet house, soothed by the simple act of sharing the silence with another living thing, even if that thing couldn't hear them. Have you ever had an animal wait for you, even when you didn't ask them to? Not for food, not for a door to be opened, but just wait? There's a profound weight to it, a responsibility. It roots you to a place, to a moment. For Sam, who had felt so utterly uprooted, Ghost's patient, silent waiting became an anchor. She was always there. In the doorway of the home office during long, lonely workdays. On the blue armchair, a familiar splash of white in the periphery. At the top of the stairs when Sam came home from a grim, necessary grocery run, her presence a quiet, "You are back. This is where you belong." The weather turned colder, a deep, biting cold that seeped through the old window frames. Frost etched intricate, fragile gardens on the glass each morning. The world outside became quieter, the sound of the distant road muffled by snow. Inside, the heater kicked on with a groan and a deep, rattling hum that traveled through the floorboards. This was a vibration Ghost loved. She would find the heat vent in the living room and lay directly on top of it, her white fur fluttering in the warm updraft, her body a perfect puddle of contentment. One afternoon, a week or so after the alarm, Sam was sitting on the floor, their back against the couch, trying to muster the energy to put away a basket of laundry. The light was fading early, casting the room in long blue shadows. The day had been a hard one. A call from an old friend from the city, full of frantic, cheerful news about parties and promotions, and a life that was moving at a dizzying speed. Hanging up had felt like closing a door on a room full of light and noise, and the resulting silence in the house felt heavier, more isolating than ever. Sam just sat there, the folded towels beside them, staring at nothing, feeling the familiar, hollow ache in their chest, the feeling of being left behind, of being on the wrong path in the wrong life, buried in a silence of their own making. Ghost was on her vent, bathing in the heat. She had been asleep, a tight white curl. But as Sam's stillness stretched from minutes into what felt like an hour, she stirred. She lifted her head, her blue eyes finding Sam in the dim light. She watched for a long time, unblinking. Then she stood. She stepped off the vent, abandoning her prized spot, and walked across the room. Her paws made no sound on the rug. She stopped about a foot away from Sam's outstretched legs. She didn't try to get in their lap. She didn't rub against them. She just sat down, tucked her paws neatly beneath her, and looked at Sam's face. It was the first time she had ever initiated a closeness like this. Usually, her proximity was a side effect of her own routine. She wanted food, she wanted heat, she wanted to be in the same room. This was different. This felt intentional, purposeful. Sam held their breath, afraid to move and break the spell. Ghost's gaze was unwavering. It wasn't a demanding stare, it was steadying. Her head tilted, just a fraction. In the dying light, her eyes looked less like ice and more like deep, still water. Do you think they know when we're at our lowest? When the weight we carry feels too heavy to even shift, let alone stand up under? Is it a smell? A change in the energy of a room? Or is it something simpler, something purer? Just a recognition of a shared loneliness. Slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, Ghost began to lean. It wasn't a fall. It was a deliberate, graceful tilt of her entire body. She leaned away from her own center of gravity, toward Sam. She didn't close the full distance. She didn't touch them. She simply leaned, holding herself at that impossible angle, a white bridge stretched across the 12-inch gap between them. A silent offer. A question. Sam felt a tightness in their throat. They didn't dare reach out. They just stayed perfectly still, watching this creature, this animal who lived in a world of silence, speak a language more eloquent than any words could ever be. They stayed like that for a long time, the human and the cat, frozen in the blue twilight. The furnace kicked off, and the resulting silence was deep and complete. In that silence, the space between them seemed to vibrate with something new, something fragile and warm. And then, Ghost blinked. A slow, deliberate closing of her blue eyes. When they opened again, she gently righted herself, settling back onto her own paws. The moment was over. She stood, gave one luxurious stretch that traveled from the tip of her nose to the end of her tail, and then, as if the entire encounter had been as ordinary as a sunbeam, she turned and padded softly back to her heat vent, curling up once more, into a perfect white circle. Sam let out a breath they didn't realize they'd been holding. The hollow ache in their chest was still there, but it felt different, less empty. As if that silent lean, that impossible bridge, had left something behind in the hollow space. A warmth, a sense of being seen. They looked at the basket of laundry. The task felt no less mundane, but the weight of it felt a little lighter. They pushed themselves up from the floor, their muscles protesting. They picked up a towel to fold it, and as they did, their eyes fell on Ghost, now asleep on the vent, her sides rising and falling with a steady, peaceful rhythm. Something had shifted. The invisible line that had always existed between them had been crossed, not with a dramatic gesture, but with a quiet, deliberate lean. The cat who asked for nothing had asked a question. And in the stillness of that blue room, Sam had silently answered. The bond was no longer fragile. It was real. It was trusted. It had begun to breathe. Winter tightened its grip on the little house on Maple Drive, and with it, a new pattern began to emerge. It was a subtle thing at first, easy to dismiss as just another one of Ghost's peculiar silent world habits. But Sam, now so attuned to the cat's rhythms, noticed the shift. It started with the staring. It was different from her usual focused, gazing at nothingness. This had a new quality to it, a specific timed intensity. Every evening, as the last of the slate blue light bled from the sky and the streetlights flickered on, casting long, skeletal shadows through the windows, Ghost would abandon her heat vent or her blue armchair. She would move to the living room window, the one that looked out onto the quiet, snow-blanketed street. She would leap onto the narrow sill with a soft thud Sam could feel through the floor, and she would settle in. And she would watch. Not in a lazy, curious way a cat watches, a bird or a falling leaf. This was a vigil. Her body would be utterly still, except for the very tip of her tail, which would twitch in a tight metronomic rhythm. Her ears, usually relaxed or swiveling gently to catch some vibration in the air, would be pitched forward, tense. Her ocean blue eyes were fixed, unblinking, on a point across the street. Sam would follow her line of sight, but there was nothing there. Just the miller's dark, silent house. Just the bare, black branches of the old oak tree, clawing at the sky. She would sit there for exactly an hour, as if clocking in for a job only she knew about. And then, precisely at 6 p.m., signaled by some internal clock or the specific way, the headlights of a passing car swept across the wall, she would hop down. The tension would drain from her body. She would shake her head once, as if clearing it, and then go about her evening, curling up on her chair or following Sam to the kitchen for dinner as if nothing had happened. It was strange, but Sam filed it away. Ghost was a strange cat. This was just another layer to her. Then, the gifts started. The first one appeared on a Tuesday morning. Sam was making coffee, their brains still fuzzy with sleep, when they saw it. A single, perfect, downy gray feather was lying directly in the center of the kitchen's welcome mat. It was pristine, untouched. Ghost was sitting a few feet away, washing a paw with an air of supreme innocence. "Where'd you get this, huh?" Sam had murmured, picking it up. It was soft as a breath. A chickadee's feather, maybe. They'd shrugged, assuming it had been tracked in on their boot and tossed it in the trash. But 2 days later, there was another one, in the exact same spot. Same type of feather, same perfect condition. Then it wasn't just feathers. A few days after that, a small, smooth, river-washed stone, white as a piece of quartz, appeared on the mat. Then a shred of red ribbon, faded and frayed. Then a brittle, fallen off the vine tendril, curled into a perfect, delicate circle. Every offering was left in the same precise location, the center of the kitchen mat. And every time, Ghost would be nearby, not looking at the object, but looking at Sam. Her expression was unreadable. It wasn't pride. It wasn't a request for praise. It was more like delivery. As if she were a courier, diligently dropping off a package and then waiting for the recipient to simply acknowledge its arrival. Sam started keeping the objects. They felt too intentional to throw away. They placed them in a small, empty ceramic bowl on the kitchen counter. The feather, the stone, the ribbon, the vine circle. A small collection of meaningless treasures, a quiet, ongoing mystery. The staring. Vigil at the window continued, a separate but parallel strangeness. Sam found themselves scheduling their own evening around it. They'd sit on the couch with a book, stealing glances at the white cat, a silhouette against the darkening window. The focused intensity of her posture was both fascinating and unnerving. "What do you see over there, Ghost?" They'd whisper into the quiet room. The cat never responded, of course. Her world remained her own. One bitterly cold night, the wind howling outside like a wounded animal, Sam's curiosity got the better of them. Ghost was at her post, a statue of tension on the windowsill. Sam put down their book and walked over to stand behind her. They placed a hand on the cold glass, peering out into the inky blackness. There was nothing. The Miller's house was dark. Everyone doubtless huddled away from the cold. Their porch light was off. The street was empty. Snow swirled in the cones of light from the street lamps, but Ghost was staring at the Miller's front door as if it were about to burst into flames. Sam squinted, trying to see what she saw. Was it a reflection? A trick of the light? They leaned closer, their breath fogging the cold glass. And then they felt it. It was the faintest of vibrations, a low, almost subsonic hum that traveled through the window pane and into their fingertips. It was so deep it was more a feeling, in the bones than a sound in the ears. It was the kind of vibration you'd feel from a large truck idling down the street or from a bass speaker 2 houses away. Ghost's head twitched. Her entire body seemed to focus on that vibration. Her tail stopped its twitching. She was listening, with her whole being, to something Sam could barely perceive. The vibration faded after a minute, gone as quickly as it had come. Ghost let out a breath, a small, silent puff of air, and her body relaxed a fraction. She turned her head and looked up at Sam, her blue eyes reflecting the lamplight from inside. For a fleeting second, she looked worried. Then she turned back to the window, resuming her watch. The moment cracked something open for Sam. This wasn't just random cat behavior. This was a response to a specific physical stimulus, a vibration. But what was causing it? And why was it happening with such clockwork regularity? And what did it have to do with the little gifts on the kitchen mat? The mystery coiled itself around Sam's thoughts, a welcome distraction from their own loneliness. They found themselves thinking about it while they worked, while they cooked, while they tried to sleep. The fear they felt wasn't for themselves. It was a quieter, more persistent worry. The fear of this fragile, strange connection being broken. The fear that Ghost was trying to communicate something urgent, something important, and Sam was too human, too trapped in a world of sound, to understand her language of vibrations and silent offerings. The collection in the ceramic bowl grew. A tiny pine cone, another feather, this one a stark black. Each item felt like a word in a sentence Sam couldn't translate. The tension built quietly, day by day, a slow creeping frost on a window pane. Sam started noticing other things. The way Ghost would sometimes suddenly lift her head from a dead sleep, her eyes wide, her body tense, as if startled by a dream only she could have. The way she'd sometimes avoid the heat vent for a whole day, as if its familiar rumble was suddenly offensive to her. She was becoming more restless, more watchful, her serene stillness giving way to a new, keyed-up alertness. The climax of the mystery began on a Sunday evening. The ritual was the same. The blue twilight, the leap to the windowsill, the tense, waiting posture. Sam was on the couch pretending to read, but their eyes were glued to the cat. The familiar faint vibration started. Sam felt it through the cushions of the couch this time, a deep, almost imperceptible throbbing. Ghost's ears flattened, her whiskers bristled. She was a bowstring pulled taut, but this time the vibration didn't fade. It grew stronger, deeper. It was no longer a hum. It was a palpable rumble that Sam could feel in their teeth. The pictures on the wall gave a faint metallic shiver, and Ghost lost it. She didn't just tense up. She exploded into action. A low, soundless yowl seemed to wrench itself from her body, her mouth opening in a terrified grimace. She launched herself from the windowsill, not with her usual grace, but in a frantic, scrambling panic. She hit the floor running, a white blur of pure, unadulterated fear. She tore through the living room, skidded around the corner into the hallway, and vanished. Sam was on their feet, their heart hammering. Ghost? The deep rumble subsided, leaving a silence that rang with alarm. Sam hurried into the hallway. It was empty. They checked the bedroom, under the bed, nothing. The bathroom, the closet. A small scratching sound came from the end of the hall, from the basement door. Sam walked slowly toward it. The old door was usually kept closed. Now they saw that the little rubber wedge they used to keep it slightly ajar for airflow had been knocked away. The door was shut tight, and from the other side, from the dark, unfinished basement below, came a soft, desperate scratching sound. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. Pause. Ghost was down there, and she was trapped. But that wasn't the thought that froze Sam's blood. The thought that did was much simpler and much more terrifying. The basement door didn't latch. It never had. The old wood was warped. It didn't shut tight on its own. You had to really pull it, really slam it, to engage the lock. Someone or something had shut it. The scratching was the only sound in the world. Scratch. A pause, filled with a terrible, waiting silence. Scratch. It was a weak sound, a desperate sound. It was the sound of tiny claws on the other side of a thick, painted slab of wood, and it drilled directly into Sam's brain, sharp and panicked. The rest of the house was utterly still, holding its breath. The deep, troubling rumble had vanished as suddenly as it had come, leaving behind a vacuum of silence that was somehow louder, more oppressive. Sam stood frozen in the hallway, there, hand outstretched, hovering an inch from the basement doorknob. Their heart was a frantic, wild drum against their ribs, a rhythm of pure fear. The logical part of their mind, the part that paid the mortgage and took out the trash, was screaming at them. The door doesn't latch. It doesn't close on its own. You have to force it. Someone had shut it. The thought was a cold knife in their gut. They were alone in the house. They had been alone for months. The idea that someone, or something, else was in there with them, had moved through the silence and closed a door, was a primal terror. Their eyes darted down the dark hallway, toward the living room, toward the kitchen entryway. Shadows seemed to deepen and twist. Every creak of the old house settling in the cold was a footstep. Every moan of the wind outside was a breath at their back. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. The sound pulled them back. Ghost. Ghost was down there. In the dark. Terrified. She was deaf. She couldn't hear them call for her. Her entire world was vibration and sight, and right now her world was pitch black and trapped. The image of her frantic, soundless yowl, the sheer panic in her body, as she scrambled away from the window, flashed in Sam's mind. She hadn't been acting strange. She had been afraid. She had been trying to warn them. The fear for themselves was suddenly eclipsed by a sharper, more urgent fear for her. This creature, this silent, gentle being who leaned into the space between them, who left tiny feathers like secret messages. She was down there in the dark because of something. Sam's hand closed around the cold brass doorknob. They turned it. It was unlocked. Of course it was. The latch never caught. They pulled. The door didn't budge. They pulled harder, putting their weight into it. Nothing. It was shut fast. Not latched, but held closed by something else. Something on the other side. A fresh wave of ice washed down their spine. Was someone holding it? Was something blocking it? Ghost? They called out, their voice a thin, reedy thing in the tense hallway. There was no response but the scratching, which had become more frantic at the vibration of their voice through. The door, scratch, scratch, scratch. Sam let go of the knob and took a stumbling step back, their mind racing. Think, the basement. It had one way in and out, this door. The windows were small, high-up horizontal glass blocks. No one could get in or out that way. If something was down there, it was trapped too. With Ghost, the thought was unbearable. They turned and ran into the kitchen, their socks slipping on the linoleum. They yanked open the junk drawer, rummaging, through its chaotic contents with trembling hands, old batteries, twist ties, a tape measure. Their fingers closed around a heavy, cold piece of metal, a flashlight. They fumbled for the switch. A weak yellow beam of light cut through the dim kitchen. It would have to do. They needed a weapon. Something. Anything. Their eyes landed on the wooden rolling pin on the counter. It was ridiculous. It was something out of a cartoon, but it was heavy, solid. They grabbed it, the weight of it feeling both absurd and comforting in their hand. They ran back to the hallway, the flashlight, beam bouncing wildly. They set the rolling pin down and shone the light along the edge of the door. The warped old thing never sat flush in its frame. There was a gap, maybe a quarter-inch wide, at the bottom. They dropped to their knees, the cold hardwood biting through their pants. They laid flat on their stomach, pressing their cheek to the floor, and shone the flashlight through the gap, trying to see into the basement. The beam cut a narrow swath through the dust motes under the door. It illuminated the tops of the wooden basement steps, rough and unfinished, and it illuminated something else, something pale, moving. A white paw, claws extended, desperately swiping at the crack of light, at the air under the door. Scratch. Scratch. She was right there, just on the other side. "I'm here, ghost! I'm here, girl!" Sam said, their voice cracking. They didn't know if she could feel the vibration of their words through the floor. They reached their fingers under the gap, wiggling them. "I'm here!" The scratching stopped. For a heart-stopping second, there was nothing. Then, a cold pink nose poked under the gap, sniffing frantically. Then, the white fur of her cheek as she tried to press herself against the bottom of the door. She was trembling. Sam could feel the fine vibration of it through the wood. The relief at knowing she was alive, right there, was immediately followed by a crushing wave of helplessness. She was stuck. The door was stuck. And Sam had no idea what was on the other side with her. They got to their feet, a new determination hardening inside them. It didn't matter what was down there. Ghost was down there. That was all that mattered. They grabbed the doorknob with both hands, braced a foot against the door frame, and pulled with every ounce of strength they had. They pulled until the muscles in their arms and back screamed in protest. They pulled until spots danced in their vision. A guttural groan tore from their throat, a sound of pure strain. With a sudden, sickening crack of protesting wood, the door flew open. The force of it sent Sam stumbling backward, falling hard onto the hallway floor. The flashlight clattered away, its beam spinning crazily, illuminating the ceiling. The rolling pin rolled into a wall. The basement doorway was a black, gaping maw. A cold, damp smell wafted out. The smell of old concrete, of earth, of mildew. And silence. A deep, profound silence. Sam scrambled for the flashlight, their heart in their throat. They shone the beam into the darkness, expecting, they didn't know what. A face. A monster. Something. The beam landed on Ghost. She was crouched. On the top step, not running out, not moving. She was frozen in a defensive crouch, her back arched, her fur standing on end, making her look twice her size. Her blue eyes were wide, black voids in the flashlight beam, reflecting pure animal terror. She was staring past Sam, down the hall, her head low, a soundless hiss on her lips. Sam's blood ran cold. They swung the flashlight beam down the hallway, expecting to see a figure, an intruder. The hallway was empty. They looked back at Ghost. She wasn't looking at them. She was looking at the space behind them. But there was nothing there. The terror on her face was real, palpable. It was the same terror she'd had at the window. "Ghost," Sam whispered, their voice trembling. "It's okay. It's just me." They kept the light on her, not wanting to blind her, and slowly reached out a hand. They didn't try to touch her. They just held their hand in the space between them, an offering. The cat's eyes flickered from the empty hallway to Sam's hand. Her silent hiss died in her throat. Her body was still tense, every muscle coiled, but she took a single hesitant step forward. Then another. She was off the step on the hallway floor. She kept her body low to the ground, a hunter's crawl, her eyes still darting around nervously. She crept forward until she was within inches of Sam's outstretched fingers. She stopped. She sniffed the air. And then, she did something that shattered the last of Sam's composure. She pressed the top of her head, hard, into the center of Sam's palm. It wasn't a nuzzle. It was a press. A firm, desperate, anchoring press, as if she were making sure Sam was real, solid, there. A single shuddering breath racked her small frame, and then she was pushing her whole head against their hand, over and over, marking them with her scent, claiming them, grounding herself in their touch. Tears welled in Sam's eyes, hot and sudden. They didn't try to stop them. They sat there on the cold hallway floor, their hand being butted by this terrified, silent creature, and they cried silent, shaking tears of relief, of fear, of a love so fierce it felt like pain. After a long moment, Ghost seemed to settle. The extreme tension left her body. She straightened up, her fur laying flat. She blinked slowly at Sam, then turned and looked back into the dark basement. Her tail gave a single thoughtful flick. Then she turned and walked back toward the open doorway. "No, Ghost, wait!" Sam started, but the cat ignored them, of course. She paused at the top of the steps, looked back at Sam as if to say, "Well, are you coming?" and then disappeared down into the darkness. Sam grabbed the flashlight and the rolling pin, their heart starting to hammer again. They approached the doorway cautiously, shining the light down the steps. Ghost was at the bottom, sitting neatly, waiting for them. Taking a deep breath, Sam started down the creaky wooden steps. The basement was a cold, unfinished space. The flashlight beam jumped over the hulking shapes of the furnace and the water. Heater over stacks of old boxes, over cobwebs draped like ghostly lace in the corners. The air was still and cold. Ghost walked ahead of them, her white fur glowing in the beam. She didn't seem afraid anymore. She seemed purposeful. She led Sam past the furnace, toward the very back of the basement, to a far corner that was damp and crowded with forgotten things. An old rocking chair with a broken cane seat, a cardboard box of mildewed books, a pile of discarded drop cloths. And there, in the corner, tucked between the rocker and the concrete wall, was her nest. It was a small, perfect circle, meticulously arranged on a folded-up drop cloth. And in it, arranged not haphazardly, but with a clear, strange intention, were her gifts. But these weren't the offerings she'd brought to the kitchen mat. These were the originals, the source. Dozens of feathers of all sizes and colors fanned out in a semicircle. A collection of smooth, white stones arranged in a spiral. Shreds of colorful fabric, bits of ribbon, curled bits of paper, all placed with care. It was a museum of tiny found things. An archive of silence, and in the very center of the circle, lying on a soft piece of faded blue velvet that looked like it had been torn from the old rocking chair's seat, was one final object. It was a small, tarnished silver locket. It was old, the clasp broken. Sam knelt down, their knees cracking on the cold concrete. They reached out, their fingers trembling, and picked it up. It was cold. They fumbled with it, and the locket sprang open. Inside, on one side, was a tiny, faded photograph of a smiling woman Sam didn't recognize. On the other side, a single curled strand of white hair was tucked carefully under the glass. Sam looked. From the locket in their hand, to the nest, to the circle of treasures, to Ghost, who was sitting beside them, watching their face with her deep blue eyes, and in a sudden dizzying rush, Sam understood, the staring out the window. The vibrations, the gifts. It wasn't about the Miller's house. It was about this house. Their house. The deep rumble wasn't coming from across the street. It was coming from down here. From the old furnace, cycling on and off, sending its troubling vibrations through the bones of the house, vibrations only Ghost in her silent world could feel so acutely. She wasn't watching the outside world for threats. She was feeling them from right here, beneath their feet. And the gifts, they weren't warnings. They were comforts. They were an attempt to build something soft, something beautiful, in the place where she felt the fear originate. She was trying to fix it, to make it safe. And the ones she brought upstairs to the kitchen mat, those were for Sam. She was trying to share her comfort, to bring pieces of her safe place into theirs. She had been trying to tell them all along, and they had been too blind, too trapped, in their own noisy grief to see it. The closed door, It hadn't been a someone. The force of the furnace's abnormal kick, the deep, violent rumble that had terrified her, must have vibrated through the house with such intensity that it shook the warped door just enough for it to finally, for the first time, swing shut and lodge itself in the frame. It was all so simple, so heartbreakingly simple. Sam looked at Ghost. This small, deaf creature who had been living with a monster in her basement, who had been trying to tame it with feathers and stones, who had been trying to protect them by sharing her treasures. This cat who had felt a danger they couldn't perceive and had tried to face it alone. They weren't tears of fear that fell now. They were tears of awe, of humility, of a love so vast it felt like it would break them open. Ghost watched the tears track down Sam's face. She stood up, walked over to them, and without any hesitation, she climbed into their lap. She settled herself there, a warm, purring weight, and began to knead her paws gently against their thigh. Her purr was a vibration they could feel deep in their chest, a steady, rhythmic counterpoint to the frantic beating of their own heart. She wasn't just in their lap. She was home. And finally, after all this time, Sam understood. They finally saw what she had been trying to tell them. They wrapped their arms around her, buried their face in her soft white fur, and held on in the dark, silent basement as the world above them finally, truly, went quiet. The repairman's name was Leo, and he whistled through his teeth as he examined the old furnace in the basement. It was a low, tuneless sound that Ghost, of course, couldn't hear. But Sam could, and it was a strangely comforting noise. It was the sound of a problem being solved. "Yep," Leo said, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. "She's on her last legs. The igniter's faulty, the heat exchanger is... Well, let's just say you're lucky you called. And this right here," he said, tapping a large, rusty bolt that was visibly loose on the main housing. "This is your phantom vibration. When the burner would kick on, this whole plate would shudder like a tuning fork. Wouldn't hear it upstairs much, but down here, yeah, you'd feel that in your teeth." Sam nodded, their arms crossed against the basement's chill. They looked over at Ghost, who was sitting a few feet away, observing Leo's work with a look of serene curiosity. She wasn't afraid. The terrifying monster had been reduced to a man with a toolbox, and the deep, threatening rumble had been explained away as a loose bolt. The unknown had been made known. "Can you fix it?" Sam asked, though they already knew the answer. Leo shook his head. "Band-aid on a bullet wound. You need a new unit. This thing's a carbon monoxide factory waiting to happen." He must have seen the color drain from Sam's face because he added, "Don't you worry. We'll get you squared away. I'll get the new one ordered. In the meantime..." He reached into his toolbox and pulled out a wrench. With 2 sharp turns, he tightened the loose bolt until it was secure. "There. That should quiet the ghost. For now." Sam almost laughed. If only he knew. The following days were different. The silence in the house on Maple Drive was no longer a heavy, suffocating thing. It was a blanket, a comfort. It was the silence after a storm has passed, clean and calm and full of promise. The deep, troubling vibration was gone. The furnace still kicked on, but it was a soft, distant hum, a gentle reminder that warmth was coming, not a portent of dread. And with the vibration gone, Ghost's strange behaviors melted away. The evening vigil at the window stopped. She no longer felt the need to watch for a threat that had been neutralized. She spent her twilight hours now on the back of the couch, watching Sam read, or batting lazily at a toy mouse, her body loose and relaxed. The frantic, fearful energy that had sometimes possessed her was gone, replaced by a deep, abiding peace. She was still a creature of silence, but her silence was no longer eerie. It was graceful. It was her language. She communicated in 1,000 tiny ways. The slow blink from across the room that felt like a warm hug. The way she would curl her tail around Sam's ankle as they stood making coffee in the morning. A fleeting, affectionate anchor. The soft headbutt against their knee when she wanted attention. A silent, "I am here, and so are you." Sam's life softened at the edges. Mornings felt lighter. The coffee tasted better. They found themselves actually reading the books on their shelf, losing themselves in other worlds instead of getting lost in their own head. They even called their friend from the city back, and the conversation was easier, less tinged with envy and regret. They talked about their cat. They talked about the quiet peace of their little house. For the first time, it didn't feel like they were describing a prison. They were describing a home. The collection of treasures remained in the ceramic bowl on the kitchen counter. The feathers, the stone, the ribbon, the pine cone. Sam would sometimes run their fingers through them while waiting for the kettle to boil, a tactile reminder of the mystery that had brought them closer to the small, silent being who now ruled their heart. They'd cleaned up the nest in the basement, carefully and respectfully. They'd folded the piece of blue velvet and placed it on the shelf in their bedroom. The locket they kept on their nightstand. They didn't know who the woman was, but she felt like a part of the house's story now. A quiet guardian. Ghost seemed unconcerned with its relocation. Her work was done. One afternoon, a week after Leo's visit, the new furnace was installed. It was a sleek, modern thing that hummed so quietly you had to strain to hear it. Sam stood in the basement, with Ghost as the installers finished up. The cat walked right up to the new unit, sniffed it once, and then turned and walked away, her tail held high. Approved. Later that day, Sam was in the kitchen, unpacking a box of groceries. The sun was setting, painting the kitchen in shades of orange and gold. Ghost was weaving figure eights between their legs, a silent, happy dance of contentment. Sam reached into the box and pulled out a new brand of cat food, something the vet had recommended for senior cats with a sensitive disposition. They tore open the bag, the crinkling sound loud in the quiet kitchen, and Ghost came running. She didn't just amble over. She skidded around the corner, her claws scrambling for purchase on the linoleum, and slid to a stop in front of her empty food bowl. She looked up at Sam, her blue eyes wide, and let out a sound. It wasn't a meow. It was something else. A soft, raspy, almost croaking noise. Aro? Sam froze, the bag of food held midair. They stared at the cat. Ghost had never made a sound before. Not once. She was deaf. She had no concept of what her voice even was, what it could do. Making a sound was as foreign to her as hearing one. But there she was, looking at the food bag, and she had vocalized. She had felt the vibration of the crinkling bag, seen the familiar shape, and some ancient, deep-seated instinct had bypassed a lifetime of silence and pulled a sound from her. Aro? She said again, softer this time, a question mark in the air. Tears sprang to Sam's eyes, but they were smiling. It was the most beautiful, broken, miraculous sound they had ever heard. They poured the food into her bowl with a shaking hand. Ghost immediately buried her face in it, purring so loudly Sam could feel the vibration from where they stood. It was her final gift to them. Not a feather, not a stone. It was a sound. A tiny, raspy, imperfect sound offered from a world of silence. It was her way of saying, in the only language they now shared, I am happy. I am safe. I am here. Sam finished putting the groceries away, their heart feeling too big for their chest. The house was quiet again, but it was their quiet. It was filled with the soft, crunching sounds of a cat eating her dinner, the gentle hum of a new furnace, the steady, reliable rhythm of a life that had found its footing. They walked over to the ceramic bowl on the counter and picked out the first gift Ghost had ever given them, the soft, downy gray feather. They held it for a moment, feeling its impossible lightness. Then they walked to the back door and opened it. The cold evening air rushed in, crisp and clean. They stepped outside onto the porch and held up the feather. A gentle breeze caught it, plucking it from their fingers. It danced and spun on the current, a tiny gray soul against the vast, darkening blue of the sky. It rose higher and higher, a silent message sent back to the world, until it was swallowed by the twilight. Sam stood there for a long time, watching the space where it had disappeared, feeling the warmth of the house at their back. They understood now. Love doesn't always need words. It doesn't need grand gestures or loud declarations. Sometimes, the most profound love is found in the quietest places. in a deliberate lean in the twilight, in a collection of treasures, offered without explanation, in a single raspy sound from a creature who never makes a sound. It's a language of vibration, of presence, of simply staying. It's about building a nest of safety for someone else, even when you're afraid, yourself. And it's about finally being still enough and quiet enough to understand the message that has been there all along. You stayed till the end, thank you. If it felt like a soft hug or a warm purr in your heart, subscribing lets me bring you more moments like this.